The House Oversight Committee has released the transcript of Ted Waitt's testimony in the committee's investigation of child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Waitt, a Sioux City native and the co-founder of Gateway Computer, dated Maxwell for 6 years, starting in 2004. And as Waitt would testify, he met Epstein several times during that time.
Ted Waitt testified he met Jeffrey Epstein for the first time in 2003 at a dinner in Hong Kong. Waitt said he found Epstein off-putting and that he avoided Epstein. Waitt testified that over the course of his 6-year relationship with Maxwell, he interacted with Epstein less than 5 times, and each of those interactions were very brief and unintentional. Waitt added that if he knew then what he now knows about Maxwell, he never would have befriended her or allowed her to be around his 4 children, including his 3 daughters, who were between 8 and 14 years old at the time. Waitt also testified he regrets not researching Epstein's 2008 plea deal more closely at the time. CNN reports that Epstein avoided a federal trial at the time of the plea deal and served just 13 months in a county jail for state prostitution charges involving minors. When asked, Waitt said Maxwell framed it as a good deal that Epstein arranged. When committee members insisted Waitt had no knowledge of abuse by Epstein or Maxwell during his relationship with Maxwell, Waitt responded, "That's correct." When his relationship with Maxwell ended in 2010, Waitt admitted he paid her $7.2 million as a, quote, palimony settlement type thing. Waitt said Maxwell planned to spend the rest of her life with Waitt and agreed with a committee member's characterization of the money as a gift.
If you'd like to read Waitt's full testimony for yourself, we have the entire 117-page transcript available online right now at KTIV.com and on the News 4 Now app for your smartphone.